That cold morning, no one expected an act of compassion to change everything. What started as another quiet day near the reserve became a story the whole town tried to explain, and few had the courage to tell. Before we begin, subscribe and turn on the bell. Here, every roar and every breath matters, because behind every white tiger there is a story worth saving. The frost clung to the edges of the world like a reluctant memory. In the small town of Eldridge Hollow, tucked against the sprawling pine forests that bordered the National Reserve, mornings like this carried a hush that settled into your bones. The air smelled of damp earth and distant wood smoke, the kind that whispered of isolation rather than warmth. Highway 47 stretched out like a forgotten vein, its asphalt cracked and empty, save for the occasional rumble of a truck fading into the grey. Elias and Mara Kane lived in a weathered cabin at the town's frayed edge, where the trees leaned in like silent watchers. Their home was modest, a sagging porch, windows fogged from the night's chill, a swing that creaked even in stillness. 8-year-old Lily had vanished the day before, slipping out during the brief dusk when the light bled orange across the yard. No scream, no trace. Just her red coat found snagged on a low branch a half-mile into the woods, as if the forest had claimed her gently without fanfare. Search parties had combed the underbrush until the stars pricked the sky, their lanterns bobbing like fireflies in retreat. Elias, a broad-shouldered mechanic with calloused hands and eyes hollowed by grief, had led the last sweep himself. Now, as dawn cracked the horizon, he stood on the porch, coffee steaming in a chipped mug, staring at the tree line. The reserve's boundary fence loomed in the distance, a rusted wire meant to keep the wild at bay. But nothing truly stayed separated here. Mara was inside, her movements mechanical as she folded Lily's blankets for the third time that morning. Her hands trembled, folding and unfolding, as if the fabric held some secret rhythm that could summon their daughter back. She hadn't slept, her breath coming in shallow hitches, eyes red-rimmed but dry, no tears yet, just the weight pressing down. The clock on the wall ticked louder than it should, each second a judgment. It was just past 7 when the first sound came. Not a knock, not quite. A soft thud against the door, muffled by the wood. Elias froze, mug halfway to his lips. He set it down, heart thudding in the quiet. Wildlife wasn't uncommon, deer scraping antlers, raccoons rummaging, but this felt deliberate, like a plea wrapped in fur. He crossed the porch in 2 strides, hand on the knob. The door creaked open to reveal nothing at first, just the cold rushing in, carrying the scent of pine resin and something muskier, wilder. Then, from the shadows of the porch railing, a shape emerged, low to the ground, deliberate, a white tiger. Its coat gleamed like fresh snow under the weak sun. Stripes, faint shadows against the pale, but it was no ghost from a storybook. This was flesh and breath, ribs faintly outlined beneath the fur, eyes the color of amber, holding a quiet desperation. Elias's breath caught, a sharp inhale that fogged the air. White tigers weren't native here, not in the wilds of the American Northwest. Escaped from a circus, a reserve breach. Rumors swirled in Eldridge about poachers or black market traders dumping exotics when the heat came down, but this one didn't lunge or snarl. It sat, tail curling once, then tapped a massive paw against the step. Thud, soft but insistent. Its breath came in visible puffs, labored as if the cold clawed at its lungs. No roar, just a low rumble deep in its chest, more vibration than threat. "Elias!" Mara's voice from inside, tentative, breaking the spell. She appeared behind him, wrapping her arms around herself against the chill. Her eyes widened, hand flying to her mouth. "What is that?" He didn't answer right away. The tiger's gaze locked on his, unblinking, pupils dilating slightly in the light. There was no fear in those eyes, only a raw, unspoken need. It tapped again, He paw pressing into the frost-dusted wood, leaving a print that steamed faintly. Elias's mind raced. Call the sheriff, the rangers. But something held him. Lily's face flashed in his thoughts, her laughter echoing from yesterday's play in the yard. Gone now. And here was this creature, out of place, out of time, choosing their door. "Stay back," he murmured to Mara, stepping out. The porch boards groaned under his boots. The tiger didn't retreat. Instead it rose slightly, muscles rippling beneath the white fur, but its head lowered in what might have been submission. A soft chuff escaped its jaws, warm breath carrying the faint tang of blood, not fresh but old, like a hidden wound. Elias knelt slowly, keeping his movements even, heart pounding. He'd handled strays before, feral cats or injured coyotes, but this was different, majestic, vulnerable. Its eyes flicked past him toward the open door as if searching for something inside. Mara edged closer, her breath hitching. "It looks hurt. Listen to it breathe." The tiger's flanks rose and fell unevenly, a wheeze threading through each exhale. No visible injury, but the way it favored its left side spoke volumes. In the reserve's shadow, stories of escaped animals weren't new, but a white tiger. It felt like a sign or a curse. The town would call it dangerous, demand it put down before it turned on livestock, or worse, searchers. But Elias saw the plea in its stare, the way it didn't bare teeth, only waited. By noon, word had spread. Old man Harlan from the general store drove up in his rattling pickup, shotgun propped in the window. "That's no pet, Kane. Shoot it before it brings trouble." He spat tobacco juice into the dirt, eyes narrowed at the tiger, which had retreated to the yard's edge, pacing in tight circles, tapping occasionally at the air as if testing an invisible barrier. Harlan's stance was all fear, the kind born from too many nights, hearing howls in the dark. He represented the town's edge, practical, unyielding. Save your pity for your own kind. The local ranger, Tessa Ruiz, arrived next, her truck kicking up gravel. She was younger, with a notebook and a tranq gun slung over her shoulder, but her eyes softened at the sight. "I've heard reports," she said quietly, voice low so as not to startle. "White tiger sighted near the boundary last week. Could be from that raided breeding op upstate. She's not aggressive. Look at her." The tiger paused, head tilting toward Tessa's voice, ears flicking. A connection, silent and electric. Tessa knelt at a distance, murmuring reassurances, her moral compass tilting toward mercy. But even she hesitated. "We need to get her contained, for her sake and yours." Mara watched from the window, hands pressed to the glass. The tiger's presence stirred something in her, a flicker of hope amid the ache. Lily loved animals, would sketch tigers in her notebooks, white ones with wings of imagination. Now this, tapping at their door, day after day. It had only been once so far, but the insistence lingered. Elias felt it too, a pull he couldn't name. As the afternoon waned, the tiger settled under the porch, breath steadying into a watchful rhythm. The cold deepened, engines humming faintly from the highway, dust settling in the wind. No one moved to harm it. Not yet. But the town whispered, judgments forming like frost. Dangerous, unnatural, unworthy. Inside, Mara whispered to Elias, "What if it's trying to tell us something?" Her voice broke the silence, trembling. He didn't know, but as dusk fell, the tiger tapped once more, thud, against the step, eyes gleaming in the twilight. A bond forming in the shadows, fragile as breath on glass. The night stretched long, the cabin filled with unspoken fears. Elias lay awake, listening to the soft sounds outside, the tiger's breathing. Rhythmic now, a counterpoint to the emptiness where Lily's giggles should have been. Mara curled beside him, her hand finding his, fingers interlaced in quiet desperation. Outside, the white tiger waited, its presence a mystery unfolding in the cold. What it knew, what it sought, hung in the air like unspoken prayer, and in the heart of their grief, compassion stirred, unbidden, dangerous. The second morning dawned sharper than the first, the frost etching crystalline veins across the cabin windows like fractures in their resolve. Elias rose before the light fully broke, his joints protesting the thin mattress and the heavier weight of sleepless hours. The air inside carried the stale scent of worry, unwashed mugs of coffee, Mara's untouched tea cooling on the counter. Outside, the world held its breath, the pines standing sentinel in the pale grey, their needles whispering secrets to the wind. He stepped onto the porch quietly, boots scraping softly against the weathered boards, half expecting the tiger to have vanished like a fever dream. But there it was, curled at the base of the steps, its white fur dusted with overnight rime, rising and falling in shallow rhythms. The creature stirred at his approach, amber eyes opening without haste, fixing on him with that same unyielding gaze. No snarl, no retreat. Just a slow unfurling of its massive form, muscles coiling beneath the pale coat like hidden rivers. It rose, deliberate, and tapped once, thud, against the lowest step, the sound echoing in the stillness like a heartbeat too faint to ignore. Elias's pulse quickened, a mix of awe and unease twisting in his gut. He hadn't called the authorities last night, not after Tessa's visit. Her words lingered. She's not a threat, but we can't leave her like this. The ranger had promised to return with a vet from the reserve, someone who could assess without harm. Harlan's shotgun bravado had faded into the dusk, but his warning echoed in Elias's mind. Trouble follows the wild, yet here the tiger waited, day 2 now, as if their door marked some invisible tether. Mara joined him, her robe pulled tight against the bite of the air, hair tangled from restless turning. She didn't speak, just watched as the tiger tapped again, paw pressing into the frost with a faint crackle. Its breath puffed out in labored clouds, warmer than the surrounding chill, carrying that underlying musk of earth and exertion. Up close, Elias noticed the subtle hitch in its gait, a favoring of the hind leg, as if an old injury or the strain of wandering had caught up. No blood, no visible tear, just the quiet endurance of survival, eyes pleading without a sound. By mid-morning, the cabin yard stirred with arrivals, drawn by the unnatural spectacle. The town of Eldridge Hollow wasn't one for crowds, but grief and curiosity formed strange alliances. Doc Harlan, not the old man with the gun, but the grizzled veterinarian who'd patched up more farm animals than he cared to count, pulled up in his mud-splattered jeep, black bag in hand. He was a man of few words, his face lined like cracked leather from years under the open sky. "Heard from Tessa," he grunted, eyeing the tiger from the safety of his open door. Exotic, rare, but wild's wild, could snap if cornered. The tiger didn't snap. It paced a slow arc at the yard's edge, tail flicking like a metronome, then returned to tap, thud, insistent, gaze shifting between Elias and the open cabin door. Harlan approached cautiously, gloved hands ready with a syringe of sedative, but his steps faltered. "Look at her eyes," he muttered, more to himself. "Not rabid, not feral. She's asking." His moral stance cracked there, a flicker of the compassion he'd buried under practical calls to put down strays. Yet fear lingered. He kept the trank at arm's length, voice low. "We get her contained, or the sheriff will have no choice." Tessa arrived soon after, her ranger truck crunching gravel, accompanied by a wildlife photographer named Lena Voss. Lena was an outsider, drawn to Eldridge by rumors of reserve breaches, her camera slung around her neck like a talisman. Tall and wiry, with wind-chapped cheeks and eyes that saw stories in shadows, she represented a different judgment, curiosity laced with detachment. "I've documented escapes like this," she said softly, lens clicking from a distance, capturing the tiger's deliberate taps. But this one's different. She's bonding. Look how she orients to the house. Her shots framed the scene cinematically, the white form against the cabin's faded paint, breath visible in the cold. The empty swing swaying gently in the breeze. Lena's stance was observational, almost clinical, no rush to save, just the weight of witnessing. People will fear her more than she deserves, call her a sign of bad luck. The group formed a loose circle at the porch's edge, voices hushed against the tiger's watchful presence. Mara stood apart, arms wrapped around herself, her breath hitching as she watched the creature's eyes dart toward the tree line, then back to the door. Inside, Lily's drawings lay scattered on the kitchen table, sketches of fantastical beasts, white tigers with gentle eyes, cubs at play. The coincidence gnawed at her, stirring a desperate hope. "It's coming back every day," she whispered to Elias, voice threading through the murmurs. "Like it knows we're hurting." Silence fell as the tiger tapped again, louder this time, paw thudding with a rhythm that seemed to echo the ticking clock inside. Harlan knelt slowly, offering a gloved hand, palm up, no syringe in sight. The tiger approached, nostrils flaring at his scent, but it didn't lunge. Instead, it lowered its head, a soft chuff escaping, warm breath brushing his fingers. In that moment, the vet's hands trembled, not from fear, but the raw vulnerability of the act. "She's exhausted," he said, voice thick, "malnourished, been running, maybe from poachers. If we don't help, the cold will." His words hung, a quiet judgment on the town's harder edges. Harlan, the shopkeeper, had already spread word at the diner. Canes are fools, inviting death to their door. But here, in the yard's hush, compassion edged forward, small and trembling. Elias felt it pull at him, the tiger's gaze locking onto his own, amber depths reflecting his hollowed grief. He thought of Lily's coat in the woods, the search parties thinning as hope waned. The reserve loomed beyond, its boundary fence a fragile line between worlds. What if this creature had seen something? The idea was madness, but in the silence, it took root. Mara stepped forward then, her hand finding Elias's, fingers cold but steady. She knelt beside Harlan, whispering to the tiger, "What are you trying to tell us?" No answer came, just another tap, thud against the step, the sound reverberating like a promise. As noon arched overhead, tension coiled tighter. Tessa radioed for a transport crate from the reserve, her voice steady but laced with urgency. "We move her today. Field exam first." The tiger sensed the shift, pacing faster, breath quickening into wheezes that cut through the air. Lena's camera captured it all, the group's hesitant circle, the white form's silent plea, dust stirring faintly from the highway in the distance. No one spoke of shooting now, but the undercurrent of fear lingered, judgments unspoken, unworthy risk, unnatural intruder. In the quiet that followed, Mara wrapped her coat around her shoulders and offered a scrap of leftover venison from the fridge, placing it near the steps. The tiger sniffed, then ate slowly, eyes never leaving the door. A bond flickered there, fragile as morning frost, human hands trembling, animal breath steadying. Elias watched, heart heavy with the weight of choice. The search for Lily resumed that afternoon, lanterns prepared for another dusk sweep, but the tiger's presence shadowed them, tapping in their absence, waiting. Outside, engines cooled on the empty road, the cold deepening as the sun dipped low. Inside, the cabin held its breath, the mystery unfolding one thud at a time, pulling them toward a truth that would pale even their deepest fears. The third day broke with a relentless clarity, the sun slicing through the pines like a blade, casting long shadows that clawed at the cabin's foundation. Elias woke to the sound of it before his eyes adjusted, the familiar thud, soft but unyielding, echoing from the porch like a pulse refusing to fade. He lay still for a moment, Mara's breathing shallow beside him, her body curled into a protective knot. The tiger had returned, marking the rhythm of their grief with its insistent presence. Outside, the air hung heavy with the scent of thawing earth, the frost yielding to a tentative warmth that felt like mockery in the face of their loss. He rose quietly, pulling on his worn jacket, the fabric rough against his skin, and peered through the fogged window. There she was, the white tiger, seated at the base of the steps, her massive form a stark contrast against the muddy yard. Her fur, once pristine as new-fallen snow, now bore faint smudges of dirt from nights spent in the underbrush. Her amber eyes fixed on the door with a patience that bordered on sorrow. She tapped again, thud, the paw landing with a deliberate grace, nails scraping lightly against the wood, leaving shallow grooves that spoke of persistence. No aggression in the motion, only a quiet urgency, as if the door held the key to some unspoken pact. Mara stirred behind him, her hand reaching out in the dim light. "It's still here," she whispered, voice raw from the night's silent tears. She joined him at the window, their breaths mingling on the glass, fogging the view of the tiger's labored flanks rising and falling. The wheeze in her exhale was more pronounced today, a ragged edge threading through the cold air, hinting at exhaustion or something deeper, hidden beneath the pale coat. Elias's chest tightened. He thought of Lily's small breaths in the night, how they'd quicken when she dreamed of adventures in the woods. Now this creature mirrored that fragility, tapping as if to remind them that some losses demanded attention. By the time the sun crested fully, the yard had become a reluctant gathering point once more. Tessa Ruiz arrived first, her ranger truck idling with a low rumble that disturbed the quiet. She stepped out, carrying a canvas crate and a medical kit, her face etched with the strain of protocol clashing against instinct. "She's weakening," Tessa said softly, eyes on the tiger as it rose to meet her gaze, ears perking forward. No words passed between them, just a shared silence heavy with understanding. Tessa's moral compass, forged in years of patrolling the reserve's edges, tilted toward mercy. She'd seen too many animals dismissed as threats, their pleas ignored until it was too late. But doubt flickered in her stance. The sheriff had called twice, urging containment before the town turned hostile. Doc Harlan followed in his jeep, the engine coughing to a stop, his black bag slung over one shoulder. He moved with the deliberate slowness of a man weighing lives against risks, gloved hands flexing at his sides. "Pulse is off," he murmured after a cautious approach, kneeling at a distance while the tiger watched, unblinking. She didn't recoil as he extended a stethoscope, the cold metal hovering near her chest. Instead, she leaned in slightly, a soft chuff escaping her jaws, warm breath curling around his fingers like an invitation. Harlan's hands trembled then, not from the chill, but the weight of the moment. The raw trust in her eyes, forcing him to confront his own history of hard choices, putting down strays to protect the fearful. Malnutrition, maybe exposure. No fever, but that leg. It's compensating. His voice trailed off, the silence stretching as the tiger tapped once more, thud, against the step, as if urging him onward. Lena Voss pulled up last, her camera already in hand, the shutter clicking like distant rain. She circled the scene from the tree line, capturing the interplay. Elias and Mara on the porch, faces pale with unspoken questions, Tessa's steady form beside the crate, Harlan's hesitant examination. Lena's lens lingered on the tiger's eyes, those amber pools reflecting the cabin's shadowed interior as if searching for ghosts within. "She's not just surviving," Lena said quietly, lowering the camera for a rare pause. "She's choosing this place. Day 3 now, it's deliberate." Her words carried the detachment of an observer, but beneath it lay a subtle judgment. Humanity's fear often blinded it to the beauty in the misunderstood, turning symbols of strength into scapegoats. She represented the world's gaze, the stories that would spread beyond Eldridge, framing the tiger as exotic peril rather than silent ally. The group converged in the yard, their voices a low murmur against the tiger's watchful rhythm. Mara broke from the porch, her steps tentative, carrying a bowl of water laced with the vet's mild electrolyte mix. She placed it near the steps, her hands shaking as droplets spilled onto the dirt. The tiger approached slowly, nostrils flaring at the scent, then lapped at it with a gentleness that belied her size. Mara's breath hitched, tears finally breaching the dam she'd built, tracing silent paths down her cheeks. "She's so alone," she whispered, kneeling closer than anyone dared, her fingers hovering near the tiger's muzzle without touching. In that act, small and trembling, compassion ignited, a flicker against the encroaching dark of their grief. Elias watched, his own heart fracturing. If they turned away now, what did that say about them, about the search for Lily, thinning as leads dried up? Tension mounted as Harlan prepared for a field exam, the air thickening with the scent of antiseptic from his kit. The tiger sensed the shift, her pacing quickening, breath wheezing sharper, a low rumble building in her chest, not threat, but distress. Tessa moved to calm her, murmuring reassurances in the quiet, her hand extended palm up. "Easy, girl. We're here." But the tiger's eyes darted past them, toward the cabin door, then the tree line, as if the tapping concealed a deeper message. Elias felt it then, a pull, instinctive, drawing him forward. He knelt beside Mara, his calloused hand covering hers, the warmth of their shared touch, an anchor in the uncertainty. As the afternoon waned, the examination revealed more. Faint scarring on her hind leg, likely from a snare or chase, and a subtle swelling in her abdomen that Harlan noted with furrowed brow. Could be internal. Needs proper care, not this. The words hung, moral suspense coiling tighter. Who would risk the transport? The unknowns. The town's whispers reached them via a passing trucker. "Canes are cursed. That beast'll bring the devil." Fear clashed with the tiger's silent plea. Her tap, thud, resounding like judgment on their hesitation. In the lengthening shadows, Mara rose, wiping her face, and whispered to the group, "If we send her away, we lose this. Whatever it is." Her voice cracked the silence, awakening their shared resolve. Elias nodded, the weight of redemption settling in his bones. This creature, tapping daily at their door, was forcing them to choose fear or the fragile bond of kindness. Outside, the highway hummed faintly, engines cooling in the distance, dust swirling like forgotten hopes. The tiger settled then, eyes half closing in weary trust, her breath steadying under their watch. But in the quiet, a deeper truth stirred, waiting to surface, one that would refract their world in pale, unforgiving light. Comment where you're watching from. I want to know how far these stories of courage and compassion can travel. The fourth day arrived cloaked in a mist that rolled down from the reserve like a shroud, muting the pines and turning the cabin yard into a spectral stage. Elias stirred before dawn, the thud pulling him from a shallow sleep. Fainter this time, but no less insistent, resonating through the floorboards like a distant drum. He lay there, eyes tracing the cracks in the ceiling, Mara's hand limp in his, her breaths even but fragile, as if the night's vigil had sapped the last of her reserves. The tiger had become their unintended sentinel, marking time in the void left by Lily's absence. 4 days now, and the search parties had dwindled to echoes. Volunteers citing the cold, the futility, the encroaching winter that buried trails under fresh snow. He rose silently, the cabin's chill seeping into his bones as he pulled back the curtain. There she was, the white tiger, her form a pale blur in the fog, seated midway up the steps as if she'd claimed them through sheer will. Her fur hung looser today, the outlines of ribs more pronounced beneath the once majestic coat, and her tapping, thud, came slower, each paw fall accompanied by a subtle wince, her hind leg buckling slightly on the lift. Amber eyes met his through the glass, holding steady, the mist swirling around her like unanswered questions. No roar, no demand, just that labored breath, puffing out in uneven clouds that dissipated into the grey, carrying the faint, acrid tang of fatigue. Mara woke to the sound, her eyes opening wide in the dim light. She didn't speak, just slipped from the bed and joined him, their shoulders brushing in the narrow space. Together, they watched as the tiger tapped again. Thud, the motion deliberate, almost ritualistic, her gaze shifting from the door to the tree line, then back, as if the forest held a secret she couldn't voice. Mara's hand trembled against the windowsill, her breath hitching in rhythm with the creature's. "She's fading," she whispered, voice barely threading the silence. Elias nodded, the weight of it settling deeper. The town's judgments had hardened overnight. Whispers turning to calls at the sheriff's office for removal. Dangerous, they said, a distraction from the real loss. But in the tiger's eyes, he saw only endurance, a mirror to their own unraveling hope. By the time the mist thinned to reveal the sun's pale arc, the yard stirred once more, the arrivals marked by the crunch of tires on gravel. Tessa Ruiz was first, her ranger truck cutting through the haze, medical crate in tow, and a furrow of worry creasing her brow. She'd spent the night coordinating with reserve contacts, her voice over the radio clipped with urgency. "She's not eating enough," Tessa said as she approached the porch, eyes on the tiger who rose unsteadily to greet her, ears flicking forward in recognition. No words passed, just a shared hush. Tessa's gloved hand extending slowly, palm up, as the tiger's warm breath brushed her skin. Tessa's stance embodied quiet resolve. Years of witnessing wildlife's silent battles had taught her that fear often masked deeper needs, but even she felt the moral pull tighten, the risk of attachment in a place where bonds could break lives. Doc Harlan arrived next, his jeep rumbling to a halt, the black bag heavier today with supplies for a more invasive check. He moved with the caution of a man who'd seen compassion curdle into regret, his lined face set against the chill. "That swelling's worse," he muttered, kneeling at a safe distance as the tiger settled before him, her tapping paused in wary trust. She allowed his stethoscope this time, leaning into the cold metal with a low rumble that vibrated through his arm, her flanks heaving with each wheeze. Harlan's hands shook as he listened, the silence stretching taut. "Fluid build-up, maybe infection from that leg wound. She's carrying something. Could be cubs, stressed from the run." His revelation hung in the air, a crack in the practical armor he'd worn for decades. Once, he'd turned away a litter of coyote pups to appease ranchers, the guilt a shadow he'd never shaken. Now, facing the tiger's pleading gaze, redemption flickered, small, trembling, in the form of a syringe prepped with antibiotics, administered with a gentleness that belied his gruff exterior. Lena Voss pulled in last, her camera a constant companion, the shutters click punctuating the mist like hesitant footsteps. She framed the scene from the yard's edge, the tiger's white form haloed in fog, Elias and Mara on the porch like statues of grief, the group's circle tightening with unspoken tension. "Day 4, Lena noted softly, her voice detached, yet laced with an undercurrent of awe. She's not wandering anymore. This is home ground for her now. As a photographer who'd chased stories of the wild's margins, Lena judged from afar, her lens capturing the misunderstood beauty in the tiger's struggle. But she held back from the fray, her moral stance one of witness rather than warrior. "The world's quick to label her a threat," she added, lowering the camera. "But look, her eyes beg for understanding, not fear." The convergence brought rising tension, the air thick with the scent of damp fur and antiseptic. Mara stepped forward first, her movements fluid, despite the ache in her chest, carrying a warmed blanket from Lily's bed, soft, faded with washes, scented faintly of childhood. She draped it near the tiger, who sniffed it curiously, then nosed closer. a soft chuff escaping as she settled atop it, the fabric bunching under her weight. Mara's tears fell unchecked now, her knees buckling as she knelt beside the creature, hand hovering inches from its muzzle. "You're not alone," she murmured, the words a prayer against the silence. Elias joined her, his broad frame shielding them both, heart pounding with the intimacy of the act. In that moment, compassion bloomed raw and unfiltered, the tiger's breath steadying against Mara's palm, a silent pact forming amid the judgments echoing from town. But the crisis crested as Harlan probed the leg, the tiger's rumble deepening into a distressed wheeze, her body tensing with a sudden spasm. She rose abruptly, pacing in tight circles, Ebor tapping erratically, thud-thud, against the step, eyes wild with pain. Tessa moved to steady her, but the tiger shied, backing toward the tree line, her hindquarters dipping as if the ground pulled at her. "She's in distress," Harlan barked, hands fumbling for the trank. The group froze, moral suspense coiling like the mist. Intervene and risk agitation, or let nature claim her. Elias's mind raced to Lily, the parallels striking like lightning, a life slipping, demanding they choose action over paralysis. In the hush that followed, as the tiger calmed enough for Harlan to administer a mild dose, a deeper truth began to surface. Tessa noticed it first, the faint collar scars hidden in the fur, not from a circus, but something wilder. Perhaps a research tag from the reserve's edge. "She knows these woods," Tessa whispered, piecing rumors of a breached enclosure where a white tigress had escaped with her litter months ago. The tiger's gaze locked on Mara then, nostrils flaring at the blanket's scent, a low chuff rumbling as if recognition stirred. Elias felt the chill deepen. What if she'd seen Lily in the trees, the tapping a desperate signal across species? The idea reframed their grief, turning the creature from intruder to unlikely guardian. As the afternoon bled into gold, the tiger settled under the blanket, breath easing into a watchful rhythm, the group dispersing with promises of return. Mara lingered, fingers tracing the air near her fur, the bond solidifying in silence. Elias watched the highway's distant hum, engines cooling like fading hopes, dust swirling in the wind. The town's fear loomed, but inside the cabin, a fragile light kindled. Compassion's quiet justice pulling them toward a revelation that would drain the color from their world. The tiger tapped once more, thud, soft as a heartbeat, waiting in the gathering dusk. The fifth day unfolded under a sky bruised with clouds, the mist of the previous dawn giving way to a relentless drizzle that pattered against the cabin roof like muffled regrets. Elias hadn't slept more than fragments, his mind replaying the tiger's spasms from yesterday, the way her body had arched in silent agony before the sedative took hold. He rose with the first grey light, the thud already waiting, fainter, erratic, vibrating through the wood like a faltering signal. Mara's side of the bed was empty. She'd been up before him, drawn to the window by some instinct sharper than his own grief. The cabin air hung heavy with the scent of damp wool and unused breakfast, the clock's tick a hollow companion to the emptiness. Outside, the white tiger lay sprawled across the steps, her massive form heaving with labored breaths that cut through the rain like ragged whispers. Water beaded on her fur, darkening the pale coat to a sodden silver, and her amber eyes, half-lidded now, fixed on the door with the desperation that bordered on surrender. She tapped weakly, thud, a single paw lifting and falling, the motion costing her, her hind leg trembling as it bore the weight. No strength left for pacing. She was rooted there, flanks rising in uneven swells, the subtle rounding of her abdomen more pronounced in the chill light. Elias's heart clenched at the sight, a visceral echo of the searches that had yielded nothing but trampled underbrush and fading bootprints. 5 days without Lily, and now this creature, mirroring their loss in her quiet unraveling. Mara stood at the door, Already wrapped in her coat, a bowl of warmed broth clutched in her hands, scraps from the fridge, laced with Harlan's supplements. She didn't wait for him. Stepping out into the drizzle, she placed it near the tiger's muzzle, her movements slow, reverent. The creature stirred, nostrils flaring at the steam rising from the liquid, but she only sniffed, her breath wheezing out in a puff that mingled with the rain. Mara's hand extended then, trembling, brushing the air inches from the wet fur. "Hold on," she murmured, voice breaking the downpour's rhythm, tears blending with the drops on her cheeks. No response came, just the tiger's eyes locking onto hers, pupils dilating in the dimness, a silent plea threading through the silence. Elias joined her, his boots sinking into the mud, the two of them kneeling in the wet as the tiger lapped feebly, her tongue rough against the bowl's edge. The yard filled gradually, the drizzle muting the arrivals like a veil over their unease. Tessa Ruiz's truck splashed through the puddles first, her face drawn tight under the hood of her rain jacket, the medical crate heavier with emergency gear. She approached without words, dropping to one knee beside the tiger, gloved hands gently parting the fur along the abdomen. The ranger's breath hitched audibly, her eyes widening at the feel of movement beneath, subtle kicks, insistent. "She's in labor," Tessa whispered, the revelation slicing the hush like a cold wind. No judgment in her tone, only the raw edge of urgency. Tessa had delivered fawns in the dead of night, but this, a white tigress far from her world, birthing in the shadow of human grief, stirred something deeper, a confrontation with the fragility she patrolled daily. Her hands trembled as she radioed for backup, voice steady but laced with the moral weight. Intervene now or let the wild claim its own. Doc Harlan arrived amid the thickening rain, his jeep's wipers slapping rhythmically, the black bag sodden before he even stepped out. He cursed under his breath at the sight, water streaming down his weathered face, but knelt without hesitation, stethoscope pressed to the tiger's side. The wheeze had deepened into guttural rumbles, her body contracting in waves that rippled through her frame, each one drawing a low, pained chuff from her throat. Harlan's fingers probed gently, feeling the strain, the life pushing against the confines of exhaustion and injury. "Complications," he grunted, his voice thick with the burden of years spent choosing which battles to fight. Once, he'd let a mother fox die in a trap to spare a farmer's herd, the image haunting his quiet nights. Now, facing the tigress's amber gaze, pleading, unyielding, redemption demanded action. His hands shook as he prepped a makeshift warming lamp from the kit, the light casting flickering shadows on the wet steps. "Cubs are coming, but she's too weak. Field delivery or we lose her." Lena Voss edged in from the tree line, camera protected under her jacket, the shutters click subdued against the rain. She captured the scene in fragments. Mara's tear-streaked face inches from the tiger's, Elias's broad shoulders hunched in the mud, Tessa and Harlan's forms bent in urgent focus. "This isn't just survival," Lena said softly, her words nearly lost to the patter. "It's a bridge." As the chronicler of wild margins, she saw the misunderstood majesty in the tigress's struggle, the white fur matted but unbroken, eyes holding a depth that defied fear. Her lens lingered on the tapping paw, now still, as if the labor had sapped even that ritual. Lena's detachment cracked slightly. Witnessing this raw bond forced her to question the stories she told, the ones that painted wildlife as peril rather than partner. Tension coiled tighter as the first contraction peaked, the tigress arching with a rumble that vibrated through the steps, her breath exploding in a visible burst. Mara gasped, her hand finally making contact, fingers grazing the sodden fur along the neck, warm and pulsing. The tigress didn't pull away. Instead, she leaned into the touch, a soft vibration rumbling from her chest, eyes half closing in fleeting relief. Elias's own breath caught, the intimacy piercing his grief like sunlight through clouds. "We're with you," he whispered, the words unbidden, his calloused palm joining Mara's in a tentative stroke. In that small act, amid the rain's relentless drum, compassion surged. A trembling bridge across fear. The tigresses wheeze, sinking with their hitched breaths. Harlan worked swiftly, guiding the first cub into the world with gloved hands, its tiny form slick and mewling, white as its mother but fragile, eyes sealed shut. The tigress nosed it instinctively, cleaning with rough licks, her body sagging with the effort. But the crisis deepened with the second cub, the tigress's contractions faltering, her head dropping to the step in exhaustion. Blood tinged the rain pooling beneath her, not vivid, but a quiet seep that spoke of internal strain. The old leg wound reopening under the push. Tessa's face paled, her hands pressing compresses, voice urgent in the hush. "We need to move her now." The group moved as one, lifting the makeshift litter with infinite care. The tigress's weight heavy but unresisting, her amber eyes flicking to Mara as if anchoring to that touch. Moral suspense hung thick. Who were they to play saviors in this wild theatre? Yet in the lift, Harlan's voice broke the silence. "If we don't, her story ends here, and ours. It hollows us further." As they secured her in the crate, the drizzle easing to a mist, a deeper truth began to emerge. The first cub, nestled against its mother's side, let out a faint cry that pierced the quiet, not distress, but recognition. Mara froze, her hand withdrawing from the crate's bars, eyes widening at a faint scar on the tigress's ear, one she'd seen in Lily's drawings, sketched from a reserve pamphlet months ago. Whispers from Tessa confirmed it. This was the escaped breeding tigress. Her litter stolen by poachers, one cub still missing in the woods, the tapping, daily, insistent, suddenly reframed, a mother's desperate search mirroring their own. Elias's world tilted, paling as the connection sank in. The tigress had followed Lily's scent into the trees, perhaps guiding her or witnessing her fall. The highway hummed distantly. Engines fading into the mist, dust long settled. Inside the crate, the tigress chuffed softly, eyes on the tree line, pulling them toward the pale heart of the mystery. Mara clutched Elias's arm, breath shallow, the bond now a tether to truths that would unravel them all. The sixth day dawned with a fragile truce, the clouds parting to reveal a sky streaked in hesitant blue, as if the heavens themselves held their breath. Elias and Mara had barely left the ranger's outpost overnight, the cabin's familiar creak replaced by the hum of fluorescent lights and the distant drip of a leaky roof. The white tigress lay in a reinforced enclosure within the reserve's makeshift clinic, her massive form curled protectively around the single cub, its tiny breaths a faint counterpoint to her own labored rhythm. The second cub hadn't come. No movement, no cry, just the quiet seep of loss that Harlan had confirmed in hushed tones as they loaded her into the transport crate the evening before. Rain-slicked fur had dried into matted clumps, her amber eyes dulled but watchful, flicking toward the door whenever footsteps echoed in the hall. Elias paced the observation room, his boots scuffing the linoleum, hands shoved deep into his jacket pockets to hide their tremble. The outpost smelled of antiseptic and pine, a sterile barrier against the wild she'd been pulled from. Mara sat nearby, her coat draped over her knees like a shield, eyes fixed on the enclosure through the one-way glass. No tapping now, no insistent thud to mark the hours. Just the tigress's flanks rising and falling unevenly, a wheeze threading each exhale like a frayed thread. The cub nuzzled closer, its sealed eyes blind but instinctive, drawing warmth from her side. Mara's breath hitched in sync, her fingers twisting the hem of Lily's blanket, still carrying the faint scent of their daughter. 5 days without her, and now this parallel suffering, the tigress's gaze through the glass, seeming to pierce their shared silence. Tessa Ruiz entered quietly, her ranger uniform rumpled from the vigil, a clipboard clutched like an anchor. She nodded to them, her face etched with the exhaustion of one who'd chosen mercy over protocol one too many times. "She's stable, for now," Tessa murmured, voice low against the hum of monitors. No elaboration, just the weight of implication. The transport had aggravated the leg wound, infection seeping in despite the antibiotics. Tessa's moral stance, once a steady patrol of boundaries, now wavered in the face of this intrusion. The tigress's eyes had locked on her during the move, a silent judgment that forced Tessa to confront her own failures, like the time she'd turned back a wounded wolf pack to avoid rancher backlash. She adjusted a drip line through the enclosure's slot, her gloved hand lingering near the bars, the tigress's warm breath fogging the metal in response. Doc Harlan joined them soon after, his black bag thumping onto the counter, the lines on his face deeper in the harsh light. He didn't speak at first, just peered through the glass, stethoscope dangling from his neck. The tigress stirred at his shadow, lifting her head with a low rumble that vibrated the air, her paw scraping faintly against the enclosure floor. Not a tap, but an echo of it, instinctive and pleading. Harlan's hands trembled as he entered the space, kneeling beside her with a fresh compress, the scent of salve cutting through the clinical air. "Fever's climbing," he said softly, more to himself, as he pressed the cloth to her hind leg, the subtle flinch in her body drawing a sharp inhale from him. No gore, just the quiet strain in her eyes, amber depths clouding with pain. Harlan's voice thickened then, the vet's practical shell cracking further. Saving her meant defying the reserve's budget, the town's calls for relocation or worse. She's fighting for that cub, like we all are. His words hung, a small act of compassion in the sterile hush, awakening the room's moral center. If they let her fade here, what remained of their humanity? Lena Voss arrived last, slipping in with her camera slung low, the shutter silent for once as she framed the tigress through the glass, white fur haloed by the enclosure's dim lamp. The cub's tiny form, a fragile contrast, breaths mingling in the confined space. She didn't click, just watched, her wiry frame still against the wall. "The story's shifting," Lena whispered, her detachment giving way to a rare vulnerability, eyes tracing the tigress's labored rise and fall. As the one who captured the wild's edges, she saw the silent justice in this bond, the misunderstood strength of a mother reduced to whispers, forcing humans to mirror her plea. But judgment lingered in the outpost's corridors. Reserve staff murmured of risks, of a predator too exotic for their protocols, unworthy of the resources when local wildlife suffered in silence. Tension crested as the tigress's wheeze sharpened into a guttural chuff, her body contracting once more in futile effort, the lost cub's absence a shadow over the enclosure. She rose unsteadily, pacing the tight space, paw thudding against the bars. Thud, thud, a desperate rhythm that echoed their earlier days at the cabin. The cub mewled faintly, scrambling after her, its paws slipping on the floor. Mara gasped, pressing her palm to the glass, tears tracing silent paths. Elias moved to her side, his arm encircling her shoulders, but his eyes stayed on the tigress, heart pounding with the rising dread. Harlan darted in, hands steadying her flanks, whispering encouragements that dissolved into the air. "Easy, hold on." "Ndi," Tessa radioed for an emergency vet consult, her voice hitching, the moral suspense coiling tighter. Extract her to surgery, risk the wild's backlash, or watch instinct claim another life. In the chaos, as Harlan administered a stronger dose to ease the spasms, the deeper truth unraveled like a thread pulled loose. The tigress calmed under his touch, her head dropping to rest against the bars near Mara's side of the glass, nostrils flaring at the blanket's scent, clutched in her hands. A low chuff escaped, warm breath fogging the barrier, and the cub nosed closer, its tiny form pressing against the metal. Tessa froze, piecing the final fragments from reserve logs, the escaped tigress's litter, 3 cubs stolen by poachers months ago, one tracked to the woods near Eldridge, white as snow, vanished without trace, but Lily's red coat snagged on that branch. Elias's breath caught, paling as the connection crystallized. The tigress's daily taps weren't random. She'd followed the poacher's trail through the forest, crossing paths with Lily during the dusk wander. Her protective rumble perhaps drawing the child deeper or shielding her from unseen threats. Whispers from Lena's contacts confirmed sightings. A white cub, small and elusive, spotted near the boundary fence the night Lily disappeared. Mara's hand slipped from the glass, her face draining of color, eyes wide with the reframing horror. The tigress hadn't just sought shelter. She'd been searching, tapping at their door as a beacon for her own lost young, entangled now in their grief. Elias pulled her close, his own world tilting, the tigress's amber gaze meeting theirs through the barrier, a silent recognition passing like a current. No words bridged it, just the shared wheeze of breath, the cub's faint mewl, pulling them toward the pale core of redemption. Outside, the reserve's edge hummed with distant engines, the cold morning yielding to a wind that stirred the pines. Inside, compassion held them, trembling as the truth settled like frost. Kindness born from this bond might yet unearth what the woods had claimed. If this story already has your heart, hit the like button. It helps the story of this white tiger reach more people who still believe in kindness. The 7th day broke with a clarity that felt almost cruel, the sun piercing the reserve's canopy like a reluctant witness, casting elongated shadows across the outpost's gravel lot. Elias and Mara had returned to the cabin only once since the tigress's transport, to gather clothes and the faint echoes of normalcy, but the drive back to the clinic was silent, the highway's hum a distant underscore to their unraveling thoughts. The revelation from the night before hung between them like mist, the tigress's lost cub, white and elusive, tangled in the poacher's web that had spilled into their woods, perhaps crossing Lily's path in that fateful dusk. No proof yet, just fragments, Tessa's logs, Lena's blurred trail cam shots of a small form near the boundary fence, the tigress's insistent taps, now reframed as a mother's Morse code across the wild divide. Inside the observation room, the air was thick with the scent of heated pads and saline, the monitors beeping a steady rhythm that mocked the chaos of the previous day. The tigress lay in the enclosure, her body a coiled spring of exhaustion, flanks rising in shallow waves around the surviving cub, who nursed with instinctive fervor, tiny paws kneading against her side. Her amber eyes, clearer now under Harlan's vigilant care, fixed on the door as Elias and Mara entered, a low chuff rumbling from her chest. Not distress, but recognition. Warm breath fogging the bars. No tapping here, in this confined world of steel and light, but the echo lingered in her gaze, pleading and patient, as if the enclosure couldn't contain the bond she'd forged at their threshold. Mara approached first, her steps soft on the linoleum, Lily's blanket folded in her arms like a talisman. She knelt at the enclosure's edge, fingers threading through the bars, the fabric extended toward the tigress, who nosed it gently, nostrils flaring at the mingled scents, childhood and wild earth. Mara's breath hitched, tears held back by sheer will, her free hand pressing to the metal as the tigress leaned closer, her massive head resting against the barrier, eyes half closing in a moment of shared stillness. Elias stood behind her, his broad frame a shadow, hands clenched at his sides to steady the tremble. The cub stirred, mewling faintly, its blind eyes turning toward the sound of Mara's whisper, "We see you now." Silence enveloped them, broken only by the tigress's wheeze, softer today, the infection yielding to the drip's quiet mercy. Tessa Ruiz entered from the hall, her ranger boots scuffing lightly, face drawn but resolute. She'd spent the dawn hours coordinating with federal trackers, her moral compass pulling her deeper into the fray. The tigress's story had become hers, a confrontation with the boundaries she'd sworn to uphold. "Teams in the woods," she said softly, voice threading the hush. "Following the poacher trails from the breach logs. That cub sighting, it's recent." No more words. Her eyes met the tigress's through the bars, a silent pact of instinct over protocol, hands trembling as she adjusted the warming lamp, its glow haloing the pale forms within. Doc Harlan followed, his black bag lighter now, the lines of fatigue etching deeper into his skin. He knelt beside Mara, stethoscope hovering before pressing to the tigress's flank, the cold metal drawing a subtle flinch, her breath quickening into a ragged puff. "Stable," he murmured, voice thick with the weight of the vigil. Legs mending, fever broken, the cub strong. But his hands shook as he withdrew, the vet's gaze lingering on the pair, the mother enduring, the young thriving in her shadow. Harlan's redemption unfolded in that quiet exam, a small act of defiance against the reserve's calls for relocation. Once, he'd failed a litter to bureaucracy's blade, but here, whispering encouragements to the tigress, "Rest now, you've done enough." He reclaimed a piece of himself, compassion's silent justice blooming in the sterile light. Lena Voss lingered at the room's edge, camera in hand but shutter still, her wiry form a sentinel to the unfolding drama. She captured no images today, just watched, the tigress's amber eyes reflecting the group's fragile circle, breaths sinking in the hush. "This is where fear meets truth," she whispered, more to the air than anyone, her observer's detachment yielding to the raw bond before her. The world's judgments echoed faintly. Town whispers of curses, reserve protocols deeming the tigress unworthy of the cost. But in this room, they dissolved. The misunderstood beauty of her white coat, scarred yet unbroken, forcing a deeper reckoning. Tension crested mid-morning as Tessa's radio crackled to life, voices overlapping in urgent bursts from the woods. Elias's heart pounded, Mara's hand finding his in a vice grip, their breaths shallow against the enclosure's hum. The tigress sensed it, rising unsteadily, her paw scraping the floor. Thud, a faint echo of the cabin steps, eyes locking on the door with renewed fire. The report came piecemeal, poacher camp remnants near the snag branch, Lily's boot print faint in the mud beside a small white-furred form. Curled, alive, trembling. The missing cub, drawn by its mother's distant calls, had sheltered near the child, their paths entwined in the underbrush. Lily, feverish but breathing, discovered in a hollow log, the cub's warmth her unwitting guardian through the cold nights. Mara's sob broke the silence, raw and unfiltered, her forehead pressing to the bars as the tigress chuffed softly. Warm breath enveloping her fingers, a recognition across the divide, instinct's quiet bridge. Elias pulled her close, tears finally breaching his hollowed eyes, the revelation paling them all. The tigress's taps hadn't been plea alone, but guidance, her wild heart mirroring their desperation, leading rescuers to the lost through shadowed trails. Harlan nodded, hands steadying the cub as it mewled, while Tessa radioed coordinates, her voice hitching with relief. Lena stepped forward then, a single shutter click capturing the moment, the tigress's gaze on Mara, breaths mingling through steel, compassion born from the edge of fear. By afternoon, as medics airlifted Lily and the cub to safety, the tigress settled, her wheeze easing into a watchful rhythm, the surviving young nestled secure. Mara lingered longest, whispering promises through the bars, the bond solidified in silence, human hands trembling, animal eyes holding hope. Elias watched, the weight lifting fractionally, redemption settling in his bones. Saving her had unearthed their own salvation, instinct and survival intertwined. In the days that followed, the tigress mended under the reserve's care, her strength returning like dawn through pines. Released to a protected glade at the boundary's edge, she walked into the horizon one crisp morning, the two cubs, reunited, white shadows at her flanks, trailing in her wake. Mara and Elias, with Lily safe in her bed, stood at the cabin door, watching the forms fade into the trees, a final thud echoing in memory. The world still needed kindness. They knew, fragile acts that bridged fear and loss, reminding us that in every misunderstood roar, compassion waits, silent and profound. Subscribe for more stories of compassion, justice, and redemption. Thank you for watching the case of After the Child Goes Missing. A strange white tiger taps on their door daily. Where it leads turns them pale. See you in the next one.